Okay, well, I think we're good to go here. Thanks everyone very much for joining us today. We're really happy to be speaking with all of you today about the basics of fundraising. It's not your most typical investment or financial planning discussion, but we really do truly believe that it can be a differentiator for advisors and for their practices to be knowledgeable about fundraising and to be able to lend a hand to their nonprofit clients and prospects when the opportunity may arise. Before we get started, I'll just cover a few brief housekeeping items. If anyone has any questions today, which we highly encourage, you can submit them both during and after the presentation using the box at the bottom right of the screen. When we conclude the presentation, we will spend the remainder of the time that we have answering as many questions as we can. Today's webinar is approved for CFP continuing education credit. You will also receive a survey via email after the presentation, which you will need to fill out in order to receive that CE credit. For just a couple quick introductions for us, my name is Paul Stanzione. I'm a portfolio strategist and a member of our endowment and foundation services team here at Manning and Napier. In those capacities, I work with many of our institutional partners and advisor partners as well. I'm joined by my colleague, Nick Centineo, who is a senior investment consultant, key member of our endowment and foundation services team, and a very trusted and knowledgeable resource for really all things related to the nonprofit space. For just a little quick firm background, Manning & Napier is a 50-year-old investment management firm with currently about $20 billion under management. We've worked with many nonprofit organizations over the past 40 years or so. And over that time, we've developed a wealth of expertise and knowledge in the nonprofit space. And we're ultimately here to help wherever we can. We hope to share some of that expertise with you all today, specifically when it comes to the world of fundraising. And right now, I'll turn it over to Nick to really get us started with the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Paul. And thanks for everyone for dialing in and listening today. Paul, I think you're right. I think fundraising plays a very important role for most nonprofits today. And as advisors, I think it's really important to understand that role. It's a bit like working with an individual investor. You know, if you want to create an effective financial plan for them, it really helps to get a complete picture of their overall financial situation. Building that picture for a nonprofit means knowing about an organization's fundraising efforts. Because again, for many, it's a big source of revenue or a source that they want to grow and focus more on. But there's another important reason why I think advisors should know about fundraising. You can differentiate your practice and the advice you give to nonprofits by applying insight that only you might have. If you work with individual clients on estate planning, on trusts, on charitable planning, or on tax advice, there may be a way to use that knowledge in the nonprofit space as well. If you already work with other nonprofits, then fundraisers want examples of best practices from those other organizations, things that you might be able to deliver to them. Essentially, fundraisers want to better understand their donors, and you all have a unique perspective that you can share. And I think just with a little bit of knowledge about fundraising, maybe call this fundraising 101, you can apply the skills, you can apply those skills to the nonprofit space. And this can just be a huge differentiator as you try to gather new business. You don't need to be a fundraising expert. I do not consider myself a fundraising expert by any means, but I think I am fluent enough to sort of understand their language, the language that fundraisers speak. And I can be of help to them, and we want to share that information with you. And so again, that's what we'd like to teach you today. We want to give you enough background to be dangerous, so you can talk to professional fundraisers, And as we go along, we'll also try to point out suggestions for how to incorporate all of this into the advice that you give your nonprofit clients. So the main sections here that we'll be covering, just by way of a preview, are fundraising trends, the philosophy of fundraising, and then the board's special role in fundraising. Okay, so let's start a little bit with a little bit about the big picture trends in fundraising. This data on this slide comes from Giving USA, which produces an annual report of aggregate giving nationwide. Individuals, bequests, foundations, and corporations gave almost $450 billion to charity in 2019. The biggest recipient organizations are religion, followed by education and human services. Stats for 2020 aren't out quite yet. It'll be really interesting to see the impact the pandemic and the recession had on giving. Preliminarily and anecdotally, I think things have been a lot better than most expected. I think part of that is due to the unique nature of 2020. The biggest factor that drives giving from year to year tends to be the economy and the stock market. Both of these took a really big hit in spring last year, and they bounced back very quickly. And many donors are in a pretty good spot financially, I think. Things like stimulus payments and unemployment benefits ended up supporting most people's finances, and the stock market, ended up having one of its best years ever. So my guess is that it might actually be a pretty positive year for giving overall in 2020, but we'll see. In talking about these stats, you can start to see maybe some of the synergies that exist between talking about investments on the one hand and then talking about fundraising on the other hand. And we mentioned this somewhat before, but fundraisers actually are very interested in the stock market and the economy because, again, these are factors that determine how much money might be donated in any given year. I think this is something that aligns really well with an advisor's skill set. Being able to deliver your investment and economic overview to a board or a development committee or fundraising staff, and helping them to figure out how this information is affecting their donors' finances, that can be a valuable resource for a nonprofit. You are their financial expert, and you give them sort of a window into the economy and markets. And that's a role that a lot of advisors can play. Another thing that fundraisers really care about is trends and current events. These are a few of the issues that nonprofits have been grappling with recently. Technology is one. So technology is changing the way people give. Social media, every organization has to do that now. Online giving, virtual events, those have become must-dos for many organizations. Legislation and politics, it'll always serve you well to be up to date on legislation that affects things like retirement, taxes, investments, and charitable giving, of course. Fundraisers care about these things because they affect donors' motivation and ability to give. Demographics, there's a tremendous transfer of wealth that'll be going on over the next 20 years or so as baby boomers get older and pass on their assets to either their kids or their charity. Smart nonprofits need to be prepared to take advantage of that by doing things like encouraging their donors to leave bequests or set up trusts, or by building relationships with the next generation. Right now, millennials and Gen Z are not a huge proportion of that overall pool of money that's donated each year, but they're only going to be growing. And in the next 5 or 10 years, it's expected that millennials will actually overtake baby boomers as the largest cohort of donors to nonprofits. And then marketing techniques. Fundraising and marketing have a lot in common. Different ideas that have gained traction over the last few years, include things like micro fundraising, where you're asked to give a very small gift amount, and then organizations use technology to sort of leverage their reach. There's peer-to-peer fundraising, where you're recruiting others to use their network on your behalf, on the organization's behalf, I mean. And there's hashtag Giving Tuesday, which is marketed as a national day of giving, happening right after Black Friday and Cyber Monday.
Nick, a topic that you mentioned related to legislation and politics that is pretty important to a lot of nonprofits in many ways is tax policy. we often think about taxes in the context of their impact on individual investors. Can you speak a little bit more in detail about how tax policies really matter to nonprofits, specifically when they're seeking to fundraise?
Yeah. Fundraisers are watching Biden's and Democrats' tax proposals very closely. Right now, they're sort of assessing which proposals might be good for giving, and which ones might be bad. In general, I sort of feel, not just me, but I guess the overall feeling in this space is that higher taxes are probably a tailwind for charitable giving because, again, there's a bigger incentive to shelter assets by giving them away. Um, but there's also been some discussions about about the government reducing the ability to itemize deductions, which nonprofits are against. Um, Changing estate taxes, that's a big concern now, and I'm sure a lot of you are getting questions about what might possibly happen with estate taxes. That adds complications because for nonprofits, it means timing of donations might be different, and it's probably going to put more importance on things like on complicated things like creating a charitable trust, doing a bequest, things like that. Things are a little bit more complicated on as far as instead of just giving a simpler gift directly to an organization. Um, so clearly, this is a this is a wide open area for advice. Nonprofits want to know what donors are thinking. They want to know what are the possible changes that might be enacted. They want to help. They want help preparing themselves uh, for being able to talk to their donors about these changes. So we have no idea. No one has really any idea what will ultimately be passed and what will take effect. But if you have the skill set to keep informed about these changes as they occur, that's definitely something that can be used in the nonprofit space. Okay, now we'll start getting into the core philosophy of fundraising. Um, these are things that professional fundraisers typically get drilled into them when they're getting their professional designation. In the fundraising world, that's called the CFRE. On this slide, we have three key principles that fundraisers always try to keep in mind. So first, people give to people to help people. This is sort of a fancy way of saying that relationships matter. Personal relationships that the personal relationships are important because fundraisers painstakingly have to build them over time. Donors aren't in the habit of giving to institutions, for example. They think of themselves as giving to people first and foremost, people who they like, people who they empathize with. And from a donor's viewpoint, a nonprofit organization itself doesn't have the needs. It's the people the organization serves that has the needs. And a lot of nonprofits can sometimes fall into the habit of saying something like, we are the XYZ Foundation and we need this money. Well, a better tactic is to say something like, the people that we serve need this money, and this is why, not the organization itself. It's sort of a fine line, but taking a personal approach has proven to be much more effective over time. People give relative to their means is the next one. Basically, it's important to understand capacity when you're making an ask. Most organizations will use a range of different giving levels to capture donors of different means, especially in something like a capital campaign, for example. The classic example, or a classic example, is if you're trying to raise a certain amount, let's call it like $1 million. Maybe you try to seek out one lead gift of $200,000, maybe 2 or 3 secondary gifts of $50,000, maybe 5 or 6 other gifts of $10,000, and so forth down the line. If you just say something like everyone needs to give $1,000, well, that's a lot of money for some people. For others, they'd be much willing to give much more. So by creating various gift levels, you're actually ensuring that everyone has a chance to make a significant gift relative to their means. And so that's what fundraisers mean by really focusing on making sure donors are able to give relative to their means. And then finally, the last principle we have here, the need for balance. it might seem tempting to put a lot of effort on the most cost-effective donors, and that's usually larger donors. But you've got to also think about the pipeline of smaller donors that might eventually become big donors. You want to make sure that that pipeline is full. You don't want to ever you also don't want to ever become too reliant on one or two big donors either, and because you never know when their situation might change. Then, of course, at the same time, it might be tempting to cast as wide of a net as possible, seeking out a lot of smaller gifts. But then, of course, the risk there is that the gifts might not move the needle as much as be. You might be leaving money on the table if you had focused on someone that had a higher capacity to give, but you're just not asking for it. So the conclusion is you need to have balance, right? You need to diversify, and that'll let organizations get the benefits of each type of gift. While again, smaller gifts lets you build a pipeline of future prospects and makes you not as reliant on any one donor. And then larger gifts help you really move the needle more towards your goal. So seeing, diversifying and getting the benefit of different types of gifts is really important.
Thanks, Nick. We're going to jump in here with a quick poll question for the audience. So if we want to just pull that up for you all to chime in. The question is, what type of nonprofit organization do you work with the most currently or intend to target to work with? Education, healthcare, human services, or religious organizations? We'll give everyone a few moments to submit their responses. We asked this out of our own interest, but also because as you'll see in the coming slides, different types of nonprofits often have very unique needs and unique approaches to fundraising as well. What works in one sector may not really be appropriate for another, and vice versa. So I think that's probably good enough time. Let's see what the results came out as. Okay, so religious organizations and education are sort of the top two, with some human services and healthcare thrown in there as well. Okay, so a pretty good variety, which is good, because we'll touch on sort of how each type of organization may focus on a specific type of fundraising or otherwise. So thanks everyone for that feedback. With clients that we work with, and that we work with our advisor partners on, we like to think often in terms of what's called the gift pyramid. In some way or another, this concept is used by the majority, if not all, nonprofit organizations. It offers a framework really for thinking about the different methods of fundraising and how they can really help to sort of support and build upon each other. The pyramid starts with a base of annual fundraising, and then on top of that, it adds on major giving and capital campaigns. And then sort of the peak of the pyramid is planned giving or state gifts. Each of the levels really work together and sort of add up to a complete fundraising program. But a nonprofit doesn't necessarily need to, nor should they, emphasize each level of the pyramid equally, because as I mentioned as part of the poll question, different forms of fundraising may lend themselves better to certain types of organizations than others. And so, different segments of the gift pyramid can be more applicable in certain areas than others. Nick, could you dive a little bit deeper into the levels of the pyramid and specifically what types of organizations typically focus more on each level?
Yeah, absolutely. We're on annual giving now. That's the first level. If you've ever given to something like a direct mail appeal or a church collection plate, you've participated in annual giving. These are small gift amounts, lots of touch points with donors, and the money usually goes to supporting the core operations of an organization. It matters because while gifts are small, there's a lot of them. And having that healthy base of annual fund donors means that you have a good pipeline to sort of fill the other types of giving. You have a good, robust database of people you can on information you can collect on. Success at this level means identification, and like I said, a good database of contacts is really crucial. Leveraging technology is crucial since it's not really cost effective to meet individually with everyone at this level. And then crafting a message that resonates with donors, that's crucial too. The decision to give at this level is simple because the stakes aren't that high. I mean, we're talking like gifts under $100. So having low barriers to giving, accepting all forms of payment, having a simple emotional message, things like that, those are keys to success at this level. And then which types of organizations focus most on annual giving? All organizations I think do to some degree, but it tends to be more important for organizations without other recurring revenue streams. So nonprofits like churches, shelters, food pantries, and youth programs tend to focus a lot on annual type giving. Major giving is the next step up. These are big gifts, usually in the several $1,000s range. They're different from annual gifts because of their size, but also because of their involvement. A grant from a family foundation is an example of a major gift. To get one, you have to write a proposal. That proposal has to be vetted by the foundation. You might have to go in and make a presentation for why your organization is worthy. That's a lot of involvement. But of course, there's a bigger payoff at the end. It matters because gifts are larger, and research shows that about 80% of the dollars that an organization raises comes from only about 20% of donors. The classic 80-20 rule. So it pays to find these people. And then cultivation is the key word here. You are much more actively seeking out these donors than you would be at the annual gift level. Donors become prospects at this stage. And of course, to track prospects, you need a database or a CRM. You need to have information about these opportunities. You need boots on the ground to make touch points happen with them. Capital giving is the next stage. Capital gifts are specifically designed to build the assets of an organization. And so this can be a building or a piece of equipment, or it can be an endowment. It's important to create a plan for capital gifts and to get buy-in from all the different levels of leadership and staff. Capital campaigns are often rolled out in multiple stages. Sometimes campaigns will have a quiet period where they perform a feasibility study or develop a case statement for support. They might start in this stage, they might start to informally ask a few of their best donors whether there's any interest in supporting a campaign. They might try to find someone who'll give a lead gift that basically paves the way for others to give because it gives the project a realistic expectation that it can get done. And then after that, the campaign can enter the public phase. And usually that means mailings, emails. There's a broad outreach that happens at that point, meaning a large amount of smaller gifts that are asked for. And then sometimes a campaign can last for years, until a goal is reached. And sometimes that's the intention, that it might last for years. Success at this level means information. Information is a key word here. At this level, donors want insight into the impact their gifts are making. They want follow-up. They want to be updated on the status of the campaign over time. And maybe, for example, there's a special newsletter for capital campaign contributors, things like that to keep them informed. And then finally, organizations that are capital intensive are usually the ones doing the most capital campaigns. Go figure. It's things like hospitals, clinics, and schools that are the classic examples of ones that do a lot of capital campaigns.
Nick, this final level of the pyramid that you're about to dive into here, plan giving or state gifts, we know to be one of the most crucial elements of a complete fundraising program, and it can really make a big difference for organizations. And we've placed a lot of emphasis on it over the years. Can you speak specifically to why plan giving is so important to nonprofits, but also to their advisors, and what are some key things to know for advisors about organizations going through the process of sort of setting up a plan giving program or seeking out estate gifts?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And good question. Plan giving, it's at the top of the pyramid. That means these types of gifts don't happen very often, but when they do, they can be pretty transformative because they're large. Um, these are gifts where a donor, I define it as gifts where a donor does a considerable amount of planning, and that usually involves their estate plans. So classic examples would be a bequest, charitable trusts, um, charitable annuities, or just something a little more simple like maybe giving away a large amount of appreciated securities that you've held for a long time. Planning and forethought are always involved. And on the flip side, you can probably imagine how many hoops a nonprofit has to jump through to get these gifts because they're so large and involved. Um, a lot of plan gifts are endowed. Maybe there's naming rights involved. It for the donor, it might include having to make a trip to your attorney's office to update your will or draft trust documents. And so that can be expensive. So donors really have to be motivated to do this. And fundraisers really have to tap into that motivation and encourage it. The key word here is investment. Donors at this level are giving away sizable amounts, and they're usually older and concerned about things like their legacy. They they truly see these gifts as an investment in the future of an organization they care deeply about. And plan giving is important to lots of organizations, but we see it focused most often on organizations that tend to be more perpetual. So again, schools, education type organizations, those are examples where this is a big focus. Um, I think plan giving is one part of the gift pyramid where, and you asked this before, Paul, I think it's one part of the gift pyramid where advisors can add a lot of value to their clients. A lot of organizations, especially smaller ones, need help formalizing a plan giving program. They may not have dedicated plan giving staff. There may not be much in the way of marketing collateral, much in the way of policies or strategy when it comes to plan giving for them. Some organizations are very passive acting when it comes to plan giving. If something comes their way, they'll take it, but they're not very active in seeking out and cultivating gifts and establishing those relationships that are really crucial at this stage. So someone who can guide an organization through that process can be very helpful. Um, and then I guess secondly, your skill set as an advisor may be well suited to plan giving. Um, we mentioned this before, but if you give advice to clients on estate planning, on trusts or taxes, I can think of a few fundraisers who would like to chew your ear and learn more about those things. So, so there's a need for nonprofits to focus on plan giving, and that aligns well with the knowledge that many of you as CFP charter holders have. And so just that's why we focus on it a little bit more, and that's why we think it's an opportunity for lots of different advisors.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Nick. So while the gift pyramid sort of illustrates different types of giving, different types of fundraising, our next topic here, the fundraising cycle, is more of a useful concept for thinking about how you actually implement fundraising programs at each level of the gift pyramid or to move donors up the gift pyramid. Nick, can you expand upon sort of how you think about or conceptualize the fundraising cycle?
Yeah, this is the fundraiser's version of a sales cycle. That's how I think about it. It's a process they use and reapply repeatedly to try to nurture donors through the different levels of the gift pyramid. And so it's got these 5 stages here. Identification is, who will you ask and what will you ask for? It's reviewing your database for the type of donor you want to engage, and that's really important here. Qualification is researching about who this prospect is, what their capacity is to give, who they know within the community, and what their interests are. Cultivation is building relationships, engaging the prospect, and preparing to make the ask. And this can include a lot of different things, but meetings, phone calls, tours of a facility, invitation to events, and volunteer engagement. Then solicitation, that's actually making an ask for a gift, making sure they know that there's a clear need for a gift, and being clear about your desire to want it. There's a lot of different ways to do this, as we mentioned before, about every level of the gift pyramid. It sort of has its own unique way of asking. Um, and then finally, stewardship. That's thanking a donor profusely and letting them know that their gift is being valued and put to good use. There's, again, lots of different recognition strategies that organizations use, everything from thank you letters and phone calls to recognition events and legacy societies. But the most important thing is that the gift is acknowledged and that the donor is thanked. Um, yeah, and then after you go through it, the process basically starts all over again. Sometimes every year you go through like this fundraising cycle with each donor you're attempting to nurture. Um, yeah, fundraisers use this concept to guide them on the steps they should be taking, and just gradually nurture donors to become bigger and bigger contributors over time. That's how I think of the fundraising cycle in a nutshell. The last thing, the last thing I guess I wanted to mention as our last section is the board's special role in fundraising. Um, as an advisor, you are primarily dealing with nonprofits at the leadership level. So this is the board, its committees, the executive director, maybe the CFO. If you start to ask how you can help with fundraising, a common response you might get is help our board members become better fundraisers. Because in my experience, a lot of them don't like to do it very much. Most people don't like asking other people for money. It's uncomfortable sometimes, but and board members are definitely no exception. But board members do play a very important role in this whole process, and this might help you clarify what you can do to help if you get asked. So the board should, number one, act as a sounding board for fundraising strategy. They should play an active role in vetting fundraising plans. Fundraising staff usually are the ones crafting a plan, but it's important for the board to give their perspective, to offer feedback, to verify everything, and then similar to their roles, and all of this is similar to sort of their roles on an investment portfolio too, but to basically act as oversight and as a sounding board for strategy. Number two, owning fundraising decisions. Every major decision should be discussed, understood, and approved by the board. So trustees have to be knowledgeable and confident of the plan that they're implementing. Review milestones and progress. Regular updates on progress are important for maintaining ownership over time. It's also best practice just because success is more likely if progress can be tracked and if adjustments can be made if needed. Working with donors is the next point. Each trustee should be adept in, I think, at least one aspect of fundraising. So maybe that's you focus on identification and qualification, or maybe it's you focus on cultivation as a board member. This board member focuses on cultivation, or maybe they focus on solicitation, actually making an ask from people, or then finally stewardship. Maybe they do thank you notes and calls. Regardless of whatever sort of stage of that fundraising cycle that a board member might sort of latch onto and make their own, it just means a lot more to donors when they get a phone call from a board member. It helps them feel special, and that's a role that board members can play. And then finally, acting as advocates and leading by example. Your message is strongest when you believe what you're saying and you walk the walk. So some nonprofits require an annual donation to sit on a board. Others just want board members to be good examples of what they're asking for from their donors. So advocating on its behalf and leading by example is really important for board members to do. So Paul, that's about all I had prepared. I'll send it back over to you.
That's great. Thanks for all the insight, Nick. Really good stuff. You know, just to sum up, ultimately we're here to help, and we want to be a resource and a solution provider for all of you advisor partners. And you know, that can come in the form of investment solutions for nonprofits, for all your nonprofit clients and prospects, you know, many of which that we offer are total portfolio solutions managed to specific objectives, you know, which may be appropriate for nonprofits, or it can come in the form of sharing with you our knowledge of the nonprofit space, you know, in the form of trainings, you know, presentations like this webinar, other materials that we put together, or thought leadership that we publish on a regular basis, whatever form it may come in and be appropriate, you know, for us all to work together. We want to be a resource, and we want to be here to help. You know, with that, we'd love to sort of take a few questions at this point. While we do so, we want to encourage you all to continue submitting questions if you have any, through the box at the bottom right of your screen. And we'll get to as many as we have time for. The first question we'll start with, Nick, is what is typically the most pressing need or lack of resources for small to mid-sized nonprofits when it comes to fundraising expertise?
Yeah, I think it's plan giving in a simple answer. Plan giving requires specialized knowledge, and so organizations often they hire separate plan giving officers who, you know, they have something like a quota, or they have to have X number of meetings every quarter or generate X number of leads. So it's seen as a distinct, in many organizations, it's seen as a distinct job role. And for smaller nonprofits, that's tough because, you know, you have to find someone with the expertise to do it. And then you've got to help find room in your budget to pay for them. But outside hiring, though, outside the hiring part, though, they also need help in just sort of developing the infrastructure for plan giving. And so this includes things like, we think the prerequisites are things like a brochure, a good website, a gift acceptance policy, and a process for identifying prospects that you want to focus on. But beyond that, I mean, there's a lot more you can do to sort of cultivate donors over time that these organizations need help with also. So it's probably one reason why a lot of organizations tend to not focus on plan giving as much, because it's a little bit more unique from things like the annual fund, and seeking out major gifts. But it's just becoming more and more important, even for smaller organizations, or maybe perhaps especially for smaller organizations, because of things like we discussed, things like, you know, people are getting older and eventually wanting to pass on their assets to charity or to their beneficiaries. So yeah, I'd say plan giving is probably the most important need for smaller organizations.
Great, thanks. Next question we'll take. Please discuss how an increase in emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion has affected fundraising efforts, specifically for nonprofits that may not have a primarily social justice oriented mission.
Yeah, I think donors have been turning out to support that diversity, equity, inclusion. I think one of the best, you know, I don't have any numbers offhand, but one of the best resources for this type of info is called Candid Blog. It's affiliated with GuideStar, which is an online database of nonprofits. So if you type Candid Blog into Google, you can probably find it. They actually have a racial equity landing page that's updated in real time, and you can see how much money's been donated to support these causes. So I'd check that out to get a lot more info or specific info on specific dollar amounts on this topic. But I guess for organizations that aren't really directly involved with diversity or inclusion, my sense is that there's still a trend toward becoming more involved, toward making their organizations more diverse, or maybe just simply aligning their values to be more diversity and inclusion focused. I've seen training programs for nonprofit boards that they're all about how to implement these values at your organization. And I think that's partially just a reflection of nonprofits wanting to, and it's nonprofits wanting to improve themselves, but it's also donors and constituents that want organizations to have these values. And nonprofits need to reflect that in order to stay relevant. So yeah, my initial thought is that there might not be a definitive increase or decrease for organizations who are making this change. And I can't justify whether you make a change or not, but it's just that these changes are helping organizations keep pace with what many donors value. And so every organization really has to think about, what do our donors want, and reflect that back to them.
Great. Next question we'll take is, are there any ideas that you can share for bringing more volunteers to the table?
Yeah, this is something that I talk to a lot of organizations about. I think the first thing is that the discovery and sign up experience has to be seamless. So imagine how frustrating it would be if you like an organization, you like what an organization does, you want to help out, but something like their website doesn't list opportunities, or there's no clear contact point for like who you can call to discuss next steps, things like that. So it's just removing all barriers to onboarding is really important, so that no one gets frustrated and quits. That means, again, listing opportunities on your website, just like you would for a job posting. It means having an enjoyable training experience if that's something that's needed. Maybe having a virtual option for people to do their training, and it means having a clear point of contact for when people have questions. Besides that, I think volunteers want to be appreciated. They want to be valued. I think some things that I've seen organizations do recently, they include things like, you've probably seen thank you cards, swag items like branded clothes, T-shirts that people can show off, appreciation events, happy hours or lunches maybe, or just handing out awards at the end of the year, something like volunteer of the year, something that volunteers can aspire to. These are all things that they're similar to how you appreciate donors too. And I guess volunteers are just another type of donor. They're just donating their time instead of their money. So I think all those same things about donor appreciation and donor thank yous can apply to the volunteer space as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Nick. Another question we'll take here, and I know this is along the lines of a topic that you speak about a lot. I just started working with a newer nonprofit who has selected my firm as the investment advisor. What are best practices for working with less established nonprofits?
Yeah, I think it starts with having that initial get to know you conversation. And if we're talking specifically about fundraising, I think it's really getting the lay of the land about what they're currently doing and how to build on that over time. We talked a bit about how there's different levels of support in that gift pyramid, and we've talked about how some organizations might focus a little bit on one level or another. We've also talked about how diversifying across all those different levels is really important. So I'd say, a good initial step is to get the lay of the land about which area they might be focusing on, which area they might see opportunity, to build more on, and then seeing what advice you can give based on that. Other examples are, we we get a lot of questions about we get a lot of questions from organizations that are small and don't have a true formal endowment or a foundation yet. Um, and that's because maybe they put all their fundraising towards immediate needs. Um, I think a lot of advisors can help in this way too. Uh, so plan giving, of course, is really well aligned with building something longer term, like an endowment. A lot of plan gifts tend to be endowed, and so that can be a great way to build an endowment. Um, Conducting an endowment campaign, that's a big task in itself, but that can be another way to build an endowment where there's an actual goal, and you can sort of accept smaller gifts towards building an endowment. But guiding a smaller, less established organization through, I guess, the importance of having an endowment, just from a financial perspective, is just means your organization is going to be much more stable. Tends to be much more stable. Um, yeah, and in addition to how to build that endowment over time, um, it's going to be a long term planning process. I think we all know that from working with our clients, but um, yeah, those are some initial thoughts I have on, I guess, uh, smaller organizations who really aren't that well established yet.
Yeah, great. Uh, Another question is, any thoughts you have on the messaging for a capital campaign?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess I'll think about, for capital campaigns. I think about uh, the one thing that sticks out to me with capital campaigns is that you never want to conduct one unless you're sure it can be successful. And so some of the messaging you do is almost done with the idea, again, having done, you do a feasibility study first, which is something that as an advisor you don't want to help with, but there are consultants that focus on that type of thing. But if your feasibility study says that you can be successful and you can be, you can reach a certain amount, then the messaging is all about, you know, it's one of encouragement. Help us reach this amount. Help us be successful in it, and then building a message also around examples too. And so we mentioned the idea of having sort of a lead gift to start off. I think that's really important too in the quiet phase, to have that lead gift established, using that as an example, perhaps as under a structure where, like, the lead gift might actually be a matching gift, so that can encourage smaller gifts. Yeah, there's just lots of things, lots of techniques, I guess, that fundraisers can use to best position their campaign.
Great, thanks. So we'll do one more here. And this one is, involving oneself in the charitable giving efforts of an organization could become a Promethean rock if one isn't doing it first and foremost for the personal belief in the cause. It's also a matter of how many nonprofits to which one can commit time. What are your thoughts about setting realistic expectations for the business return for an advisor, for why an advisor took on a volunteer role?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure if, the intention of the question is to um, focus on, like, just the volunteer efforts of the advisor, or whether it's the nonprofit clients that the advisor works with. I think the thrust of the question is, like, how much extra work might this involve? Um, I'm I'd encourage everyone to be very careful about managing expectations with talking about fundraising, and with working with nonprofits in general. Um, in the initial webinar we did a few months ago, we talked about how slow nonprofits can be in making decisions or making any changes. It's a board dynamic, it's a group dynamic, which means it does tend to be more bureaucratic, which means it can be an investment in time on your behalf. I mentioned about, I think managing expectations on the fundraising side is also important. So I said at the onset, I don't consider myself a fundraising professional or fundraising expert by any means, and I mentioned that to nonprofits that we work with, but I try to position myself as we have a unique viewpoint on things like the financial situation of your donors, on things like the estate planning and charitable motivations of your donors, because advisors help with those things from a financial standpoint. And if you work with other nonprofits, you can act as sort of a clearinghouse for sharing best practices between different organizations. You can say, I've seen this be successful at XYZ Foundation, and I think this is something that can be applied here too. So yes, I think there are definitely risks to becoming involved and doing, the level of work that it requires to work with nonprofits. But the benefits are, if you help this client and if you can, show your value to them, they'll love you forever and they'll refer you to other organizations. Many board members sit on multiple boards. Many board members are also wealthy individuals themselves who have money they want to invest. And so it acts as sort of a multiplier effect. Working in this space can open up a lot of doors into other opportunities. So hope that answers the question. It's a bit of a balancing act, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, Nick. That's just about all we have time for today. Any questions we didn't get to, we'll be sure to follow up with you after the webinar. As was mentioned, I think earlier in the chat, we will be sending a recording, emailing a recording of the presentation to all of you within a few business days for your reference. Please feel free to reach out in the meantime, or anytime really, with any follow-up or other questions that any of you have. Just a reminder, in order to receive the continuing education credit, you will need to fill out the survey that you receive via email after the webinar. So Nick, thank you very much again for the time today. And I'd like to thank all of you in the audience on behalf of Nick, myself, and all of Manning and Napier for joining today. Have a great day.